So welcome to Sangha Night. So we've been for a long time now exploring this symbol, the Wheel of Life, at Sangha Night. Very rich and complex traditional Buddhist symbol, so I'm sure that you've made it to at least one of those talks, I imagine, so you've probably got some vague idea what we're talking about. So I'm not going to go over all of the information we've had in all the previous talks. If you want to know all about those talks, you can download them and listen to them online, and they're very fine talks, so I would suggest you do that if you've forgotten them. But I'm just going to skip straight to the part of the wheel that we were looking at last time. So last week we had a week about meditation, didn't we? And the week before that, we were looking at this outside rim. But Daniel was giving a talk about this round the outside bit. And so you remember that he described, I mean, we don't need to go into them now, but basically the little images around the edge describe the mechanics of how the wheel goes round and round again. So how we do the same things again and again. So in particular, he focused on the little bit at the bottom, which is the sort of important bit, because that's the bit where we can do something different. That's the bit where we make the choice, either we go round on the wheel again or we get off the wheel. So that's the crucial bit, really. So I've done a little, I'm not the best at graphic design, so there we are. This is my attempt to make some sort of... So basically in life, we go along in life, we have lots of sensations, lots of points of contact, things happen to us. Sometimes we like them, sometimes we don't. We have different feelings about them. And usually what we do is we just respond very automatically, we push away what we don't like, we pull towards us what we do, and then we go off around the wheel again, like a lovely merry-go-round. So we've heard a lot about this, so I won't go on and on about this, but just to refresh our memories, this is what's happening, we're going round and round. And and it's really frightening. I mean, I know we talk about this a lot, but it is very frightening how automatic this is. I mean, it's just so quick, isn't it, the gap? The gap is where we can do something different. I was just driving here, I was doing something directly before this, so I was a little bit nervous I was going to be late. And I found myself driving right up the rear end of the cars in front of me. How rude. But I was so nervous to be late that I was doing it. I didn't even realise I was doing it. And I think that's what it's like sometimes. It's not that we decide, oh, I'm going to do craving now. It's just we're there. We're doing it before we even know we're doing it. So it's very, very difficult to spot that. But if we can spot that, then that's where the whole spiritual life opens up, and we can, there's a whole realm of possibilities. And it's this realm of possibilities I'm going to be exploring in this talk. So, you've probably come across the concept of pratitya samappada, or conditioned co-production, conditioned co-arising. I remember that Pradaya's talk some weeks ago, he mentioned this. This is the thing that's written on that block of wood there for you to mull over. So basically, conditioned co-production is the Buddha's central insight. It's a central way that he tried to describe his experience of enlightenment. So it's what it is that everything he noticed, everything in existence, arises only on the basis of millions, billions, gazillions of conditions all coming together all at once. And only if those conditions are in place does that thing arise. And when those conditions cease to be in place, that thing no longer exists. So things are constantly going in and out of existence on the basis of all of the conditions. And this includes everything in the world that we can observe, everything about ourselves, including everything about our mind. So absolutely everything is like this. So in the case of the Wheel of Life, what the, just to go back to that image if I can, so what the thing around the outside is describing is it's describing how conditionality works in a circle. So we call this cyclical conditionality, sending us round and round in a cycle, doing the same thing over and over again. And actually it's worse than that. We're not doing just the same thing over and over again. We're doing the same thing more. It's like we're binding ourselves every time we go around the circle more and more tightly into a big knot. Which is more and more difficult to undo. So that's why it's helpful to have this, because it's showing us how we're getting into this state. So far pretty depressing, but the good news is that conditionality works not only on how we create negative states, but also on how we create positive states. So that's very good news. So in other words, we can speak of conditionality operating not only in a cycle going round and round, but in a spiral, so travelling upwards and outwards. And we can call this a creative mind. A creative mind because each state that we create in this spiral leads on to successive further creative states. So it's just getting better and better the whole time. So so you can imagine it's rather than going round and round, winding ourselves into a knot, it's almost like we're unwinding ourselves out of the knot into this big sort of ever going on path forever and ever, like this. This is an actual spiral path that exists. Can you believe it? I think it's in Denmark or something. So it's in the forest, and it goes. I mean, there's an end to this spiral path, but there we are. So it doesn't just go up; it goes outwards. And I really like this image because it shows when you get to the top, you've got this fantastic view. You've got loads of perspective. I imagine it's quite a nice experience. So you can imagine the spiral path is like a transcendental version of that. And it's a lovely image because that's where we're going with the spiral path. The end point of the spiral path is enlightenment. The spiral path is how we get to enlightenment. So that's what this talk's going to be about. How do we engage with, get on, travel up the spiral path to enlightenment? So, where I'm going to look for the inspiration for this is the Pali Canon. So, the Pali Canon is a very large group of texts written which describe the Buddha's life and teachings. Very, lots and lots of them. I'm pretty into the Pali Canon, as you probably know. And in the Pali Canon, there's lots of different spirals. So that's very good. So most people don't realise this, but there are lots of spirals, not just the one. So lots of options. So we're going to look at a few different options today, different ways we can access the spiral. So the first one we're going to look at is the pretty standard spiral path. This is the one that if you've come across a spiral path before, and I said spiral path to you, you would probably think, oh yes, that spiral path. So I'll just quickly give you the overview. I'm not going to go, don't need to worry, I'm not going to go through every single step in the spiral. I just want to give you the outline first. So we start off at the very, it's probably going in the wrong direction really, it should start at the bottom and go upwards, sorry about that. So anyway, imagine it's the other way up. We start with dukkha, interesting. So we start with suffering, unsatisfactoriness, first step. Then shraddha, so faith or confidence, interesting. And then from that arises joy. And then rapture, so rapture is quite a physical sensation. And then bliss, which is the calming down of the physical sensations. Should read what I've written really. Never mind. And then we've got calmness of body and then concentration. So this is samadhi. So when we talk about meditation proper, this is where that happens, quite far down up the spiral. And then we get knowledge and vision of things as they really are. And the reason I've drawn a line here is that's the point where insight arises. So once all of these lovely things have happened, we're calm, concentrated, relaxed, we're in a state of real absorption, then we can see into how things really are. So we can think of this in terms of the lakshanas, so seeing things as being really impermanent, unsatisfactory, and without any fixed self. When we see the world like this, then we've achieved some sort of insight. And after that point, we don't go back. So up until this point, we can always fall back down the spiral, but this is the point where, once you've got to that point, it's all sorted, you're going to be fine. And so then we've got, so when we see things as they really are, so when we see that things are a bit impermanent and unsatisfactory, we necessarily will think, well, I'm not so interested in them. So then we might turn away from them, we might withdraw from them, which is the next stage. And then our desire for those things just melts away, dispassion. It sounds a bit unattractive. It's not an unemotional state, but it's a state where we're not wound up by the things that aren't going to bring us happiness. And then we're free, liberation, which is great, but then the final step is that we know we're free. So at that point, when we are free and we know we're free, that's the point where we could say that we've become enlightened. It's a really interesting list, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing. There's lots of really good talks on Free Buddhist Audio. If you do want to go into it more, there's a really good one by Divan, there's a really good one by Subhadramati. If you want those references, come and find me. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus mainly on the first two because that's how we get on the path, which is very important for us. And I'd say as well, don't take it too literally. You can't actually divide our experience up into 12 parts like this. It's just a bit of a map, and there is a lot of overlap between these steps and the steps in the other spiral path, so don't sort of take it too literally. And the idea with a spiral path, any spiral path, is that when you get to a stage in the path, the next stage will naturally unfold. So there's no need to force it. So supposing we've completed all these steps and we've come all the way up to bliss day, once this has completely come to fruition, then this step will arise. So that's the idea with spiral paths, is that everything is gradually unfolding very, very naturally and unforced. Right, now I just need to find where I'm supposed to be. Okay. So let's just worry about the first two steps first of all, because I think that's very interesting. Dukkha leading to faith. Now, is that our experience? Interesting. I always found this very interesting when I came to the Dharma in the first place. I thought, well, I've experienced a lot of dukkha in my life. Have I experienced a lot of faith? Not sure. Doesn't seem to me that dukkha necessarily leads to faith, I thought. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, many, many years. And I imagine it's the same for you. I imagine that you've experienced lots of dukkha. In a way, we're all experiencing dukkha most of the time. If we were all experiencing dukkha in this way, and faith naturally always arose, well, there'd be no problem, would there? We'd all be sort of well away, but that's not happening. So why? Why isn't it happening? So that's what I want to look at. And to understand this, what this link is about, I want to go briefly back to the wheel. This wheel. So, in the wheel, if you remember, we've got the wheel coming round, and then what happens is we've got our feeling, so our Vedana, so whether we like something or not, and that takes us round to craving. So normally just swing straight into craving and back round the wheel. So Sangha suggests that actually dukkha corresponds to feeling here, and shraddha corresponds to craving. So they you can overlay one on top of the other. So I'm going to unpack this because it's a bit difficult to grasp immediately. But I can help explain it by giving you an example from my life. So some of you know that last year I decided to become a piano teacher. So that's what I do now for a living. So it's been quite a steep learning curve, you might say, sort of thrown myself into it. And a lot has been riding on that for me. So it's been a very strong experience, and I've noticed a lot of very strong Vedana, lots and lots of strong feelings in response to that. And sometimes these Vedanas are unpleasant. So sometimes there's sensations that I don't like. So, for example, if I'm teaching a child and they're misbehaving and they won't do what I say, that's very unpleasant. I don't like that very much. Or if I have to do a lesson when I'm not feeling very well, or if I'm a bit tired or not feeling very inspired, or if I'm feeling a bit unconfident about what I'm going to teach that day, or if I've just had to sit in a traffic jam and I'm going to be late for my lesson, all these things, not pleasant. So it's really easy to understand how those Vedanas might be unsatisfactory. So if we're trying to make a link between why Vedanas might be unsatisfactory, does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So if I'm experiencing these unpleasant feelings, well, that's Vedana, that is dukkha. That is dukkha Vedana. But what about pleasant Vedana? How is that dukkha? Because this is saying that all dukkha is unsatisfactory. So why are my pleasant Vedanas? So I might be going to a lesson and somebody might give me lots of encouragement or praise. Or I might do a really good lesson and I might feel dead good about that. Or, one of my students might make this great breakthrough with something. So that's lovely Vedana, lovely feelings that I'm getting from my teaching there. So why is that dukkha? Well, it's dukkha because however lovely those feelings might be, they are not satisfying me deeply. They are not truly satisfying me. So supposing a parent does pay me a compliment, that's lovely, isn't it? So I'm going to feel nice about myself and encouraged for a little while. But it's an impermanent thing, that Vedana. It's going to change. It's going to go away. I'm going to need more compliments. I'm going to need more encouragement. I can't take my lasting satisfaction from that nice feeling that I got for that moment. And then what about the next lesson? What if that's not good? What if I'm basing my life and my happiness on pleasant Vedana? Well, that's obviously going to cause me dukkha, because I can't always get pleasant Vedana, especially if you're a teacher. You know, you can never always get pleasant Vedana. You're going to get some dukkha. So that's why Vedana is dukkha, because deeply, at its deep level, it's deeply unsatisfactory. It's not meaningful. No Vedana, whether pleasant, painful or neutral, is going to satisfy me in a lasting, substantial way. Because even if it was all lovely all of the time, just feeling nice is never going to do it for me. I don't know about you, but I need more than just feeling nice. So the first step on this spiral path is understanding, is really seeing that however lovely or not or otherwise our Vedana is, it's unsatisfactory at this deep existential level. And so when we see this, when we see that our Vedana, however lovely it might be, is never really going to do it for us, then what are we going to do naturally? Well, we're naturally going to turn towards something that will. We're going to start looking around. Okay, life like this, you know, just feeling nice, that's not enough. So what is enough? Where am I going to go for that? And this is why the next step that arises is Shraddha, so faith or confidence. So we start to place our heart on something else. So Shraddha, the literal meaning of Shraddha, is to place the heart. It's what we place our heart onto. So if we stop placing our heart, if I stop placing my heart on depending on whether people are going to say nice things about my teaching, and I know that's not going to work, if I start placing it on my Dharma practice, my meditation practice, my connection with the Buddha, if I place it on these things, then this is what's going to really satisfy me. So my heart naturally moves towards something that is going to be more satisfying. So faith and craving are very similar in some ways, because they're both moving outside towards something. They're trying to bring something towards us. But in the case of faith, of Shraddha, it's not neurotic, because what we're trying to move towards is going to truly satisfy us in the way that the other things are not going to. And when we do this, so when we recognise this, when we start to place our heart on something which really does have meaning, then that's when joy arises, because joy will naturally arise as a result of that. Suddenly, I'm good, I'm doing something with my life that means something, and then, we're happy, we kind of joy arises, and I'm sure you'll have experienced that. And then on the basis of that joy, the subsequent stages of the path unfold. So I think we probably can be confident that if we're sitting in this room, we've experienced this. We might be very, very clear that we have. We might be dead sure, lots of dukkha, lots of faith, sweet. But it might not be as clear as that for us. But I can guarantee you pretty much that if you're here, probably you've had this going on. Some sense, however subtle, that things normally, as we live them, aren't quite right, slightly wrong orientation, needing something a little bit more meaningful, and searching for something, and then finding that thing here, however subtle that might be. Because if that hadn't happened, you probably wouldn't be sitting here this evening. So you're probably on this spiral, or at least you've stepped a foot onto this spiral tentatively, as we all have. So it's worth thinking about, so how can we substantially stand on the path in this way? If we want to move up the path, this stage has got to really flower, really come to its full fruition. So we want to really engage with this kind of way of this mode of operating. So what can we do about this? How can we help ourselves to see into dukkha, into Vedana as dukkha? How can we help ourselves to move into faith? So I was listening to Vidanya's talk that he gave a couple of weeks ago again, and he mentioned about experiencing our Vedana, and I think that's the first point to make really, is that if we can't sit with our experience, with our Vedana, we've really got no hope of identifying them as suffering. And I just think that's very difficult, especially these days when distraction is everywhere. My phone is in my pocket, before I know it I've got it in my hand, I'm on Facebook. It's just very, very difficult to sit with our experience, especially if it's uncomfortable, if it's difficult, or if it's boring, actually. That's sometimes worse, if there's nothing really going on. And we've got lots and lots of ways that we deal with this normally. So we kind of go on our phone, we go on Facebook, we put on another thing of the series we're watching off Netflix, have a drink, we smoke, we overeat, we channel hop, all these things we do to try and get away from really being with how we're feeling. So one of the first things we could do is see if we can try and get rid of a few of those distractions. And so we can really notice when the experience we're having is dukkha. Because that is really quite a powerful insight, actually. And to do this does take a lot of patience and a lot of courage. It's not easy to, sit on your hands rather than getting your phone out and really be like, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable in my body. I don't like it. I want it to go away. And it's not nice, but if we don't do that, then it's going to be very difficult for faith to arise in us, because we're not going to be looking for something better. We're always going to be looking in the same place. So if our dukkha is unpleasant, that's what we can do. If our dukkha is pleasant, it's a slightly different problem, isn't it? Because sitting with my pleasant Vedana isn't a problem. I don't know about you. In a way, that is the problem. That's all we want to do, is sit with our pleasant Vedana. So what do we do in those situations? So in those situations, we need to start looking behind the Vedana for the suffering that's lurking, undoubtedly, behind the Vedana. So, for example, in a recent meditation I was having, I realised I've been sitting there for quite a long time, just thinking nice thoughts, not actually meditating, because that's not meditating. So I was just sitting there, enjoying my thoughts, and probably because I'd been thinking about this talk, I thought, maybe I should do something about that. Maybe I should try and look for the dukkha in that pleasant Vedana, because it was nice, I was really enjoying myself. I could have sat there for the rest of the hour, but I thought, no, I'll look for the dukkha, is there any dukkha here? And it was very interesting. There was a lot, actually. So firstly, I noticed that all this running around after pleasant thoughts left me feeling discontented. There was a kind of uneasiness in my experience, like I was chasing something that I couldn't quite catch. There's this feeling of not being here, I was sort of over there. And it just wasn't very nice, actually, when I looked into it properly with my attention. It was just a bit ick. It was almost bordering on anxiety, actually, because if my, I was depending on having nice thoughts. So I had to be always having more nice thoughts. So it was a bit of hard work, actually. So there was that, it was a very unsettled experience. And so my body felt quite tight and uneasy as well. And as you know, if your body is not relaxed, you can't really meditate well. And then after I recognised that, I recognised more importantly, I was very, very far away from the sorts of mental states I had intended to cultivate when I sat down, which was a connection to something deeper, higher, at the very least, a kind of relaxation and clarity of mind. And I wasn't anywhere near any of those states. I was, in a way, I was further away from those states than I had been when I initially sat down. And when I recognised the suffering of that situation, I was suddenly overcome with this regret and longing for something better than that I was giving myself. I was really letting myself down. And I really wanted to find an ease and a peace that I really wasn't achieving by doing that behaviour, and how far away I was from where I wanted to be. And when I clocked this, a very strong faith arose in me, actually. I felt lots of regret. And what was interesting is my meditation immediately swung towards being more concentrated, and I was more behind it, because I was much more aware of where I didn't want to be going. It was a very strong experience, and I actually cried because the pain of where I was in relation to where I wanted to be was so strong. And if that is a kind of an aspect of faith, longing faith, you kind of recognise where you want to be. And that was an experience I had. So to take this step on the path, this particular spiral path, we need to sit with and investigate our experience, so whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. And if it's pleasant, we might have to be quite rigorous with ourselves and ask ourselves, is this truly satisfying? It might be nice, but are we really getting meaning out of this? Is this really where we want to go? And if the answer is no, then to really hear that in our hearts, really let that sink in. No, this isn't where I want to go. It's not that no one's telling you off. It's about us, it's about our hearts and where we want to place our hearts. I don't want my heart to be placed in that way. I want it to be placed on something more beautiful. And if we start to hear in ourselves that we're not satisfied with where we are placing our heart, very naturally we will start to place it on something else. And if we kind of engage in this sort of way of behaviour, of thinking, of reflecting, faith will start to become a much more natural part of our Dharma lives and our response in the world. So that's a bit about this particular spiral path number 1. If that floats your boat, brilliant, but if not, we've got a couple of other options, so don't panic. Okay, so number 2. So as you'll know, some of you, I really like Buddhist lists, and I thought that these 3 spiral paths fit quite neatly into a list that we all know, which is the threefold Buddhist path, which we'll have learnt very early on in our career as Buddhists. So we've had, I think this is to do with wisdom, because it's really seeing into the nature of things. So we've had wisdom. So the next one, which I think has more to do with meditation. So it's what we turn towards and spend our time with in our minds. And this second spiral path is given to, in a discourse given to one of the Buddha's disciples called Mahanama. Mahanama's got some questions and the Buddha gives him some answers. And in this discourse, the Buddha talks about a spiral path. And this spiral path has 6 different starts to it. But the first 3 are the ones I want to talk about. So the Buddha says that this spiral path, the first step of the spiral path, is to reflect and recollect the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So the 3 jewels. So, for example, we might bring the Buddha to mind. And this is how the Buddha suggests we might reflect. Indeed, the Blessed One is worthy and rightly self-awakened, consummate in knowledge and conduct, well gone, an expert with regard to the world, unexcelled as a trainer for those people fit to be tamed, the teacher of divine and human beings, awakened, blessed. Does anybody recognise that list of qualities? Do you want to tell me where they're from? Yeah, good. So that's a very traditional list of qualities that the Buddha that occurs again and again that people recite from. We have it in a text that we recite in this tradition called the Tiratnavandana, which means the salutations to the 3 jewels. And that's what we would do to the Buddha. And he goes on to say to give different qualities for the 3 different jewels that we would rejoice in. And he says, if we reflect in this way, at any time when a disciple of the Noble Ones is recollecting the Buddha, his mind is not overcome with passion, not overcome with aversion, not overcome with delusion. His mind heads straight, based on the Buddha. And when the mind is headed straight, the disciple of the Noble Ones gains a sense of the goal, gains a sense of the Dhamma, gains joy connected with the Dhamma. In one who is joyful, rapture arises. In one who is rapturous, the body grows calm. One whose body is calmed experiences ease. In one at ease, the mind becomes concentrated. So you'll notice that we had joy and the other one. So once we get to joy, the spirals are all pretty similar. It's the beginnings that are different, which is interesting. So this is my attempt to summarise the first couple of steps of this. So we start off recollecting the 3 jewels. Yeah. We recollect, we bring to mind the qualities we're aspiring to, the highest qualities we can imagine that we want to embody for ourselves. And when we do this, we are not overcome by the poison, so we cease to be buffeted around by craving and aversion like we are on the wheel. That's not driving us so much anymore. And instead of that, what is driving us is the Dharma, the goal. Our mind heads straight. So we're really kind of focused now. We're not wafting around depending on what our Vedana happens to be, left and right. And then after that we experience joy. So I think these qualities, mind heading straight, understanding the goal, I think that's very similar to faith actually. So in some ways we're still concerned with the same thing, but the entry point is different. So in this spiral, instead of reflecting on what's unpleasant that we want to move away from, you could say that in this spiral, what we're doing is instead we're focusing first on what we want to move towards. So that's the difference in emphasis. In this one, we're moving towards something. So depending on your temperament, this might seem a lot more appealing than the first one, or not. So what might it look like to step onto this particular spiral path? How do we recollect this rejewel? So if we know the Tiratnavandana, we can recite that, but even if we do, that might not be enough for us. So what else might this look like? So let's think about contemplating the Buddha, first of all. So contemplating the Buddha is a very traditional Buddhist practice, actually, right back from the time of the Buddha. And we can do this in various ways. So we could bring the image of the Buddha to mind. And we could, there might be some pictures, we might have some statues that work for us, or we might have pictures of the Buddha. We might have a picture of the Buddha in our mind. So it doesn't really matter where the picture of the Buddha is coming from, if we are visual and we like to recollect in that way. And we can recollect the qualities of the Buddha, so his great compassion, his kindness, his wisdom, his elephant gaze, all those lovely things that we admire about the Buddha, really dwell on those and bring them to mind. And then the other way, of course, is in mantras. So mantras are sound symbols for the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So if we know the mantra of the Buddha, we can chant that. And the other way, which is my favourite, is we can read stories about the Buddha. We can actually go back to the Buddhist texts and read the stories about the Buddha, and they're very funny, a lot of them. I think they're hilarious, some of them. And I was studying something with Patty the other week, and it was brilliant, very, very funny. You really get a sense of the Buddha as a person in India trying to communicate the Dharma to these people. It's really fantastic. I really recommend that. So there's some things we can do to recollect the Buddha, if our connection with the Buddha. We don't have to do all these things, but any of these things would get us on the path, I'm assuming. So if contemplating the Dharma is a better way in for you, well, what can we do about that? So even if you're fairly new here, you probably know quite a lot of Dharma by now. Even if you only have heard one or two things that strike you, that you remember, in some ways that's enough. That's a good start. And because certain teachings at different times will be useful for each of us, and one or two teachings at any one time is probably all we need to get us going. And so if there are teachings that are particularly useful or sticking in our mind at the moment, we can really encourage that. We can do more to try and keep those in our minds, so we act from them more and more. So we can do all sorts of creative things, like we can write them out. Some people like writing out Buddhist texts is a very traditional practice as well. You can write them in unlikely places. I particularly enjoy the mirror in the men's community, which has some Dharma in the bathroom. So I like going to the toilet in the men's community and deepening my wisdom as I wash my hands. It's great. You could learn bits of the Dharma by heart. So a lot of us probably know the Heart Sutra that we recite in the puja. If not, maybe learn that. Or learn just one or two little verses from the Dhammapada or something that struck you. When we learn something by heart, it's like it goes in on a deeper level and it's there ready to become part of our being. It's a very strong practice, so you don't have to have an amazing memory, just one or two lines, really knowing them in your bones can really change things. The other thing we can do is find opportunities to study the Dharma, discuss the Dharma with people, come to events here, talk to people about conditionality in the tea room when you're having your tea at the break, any opportunity. Contemplating the Sangha, what can we do? Well, we're at Sangha Night, good start. So difficult to not contemplate the Sangha when you're sitting surrounded by the Sangha, so excellent. And even when you're not surrounded by the Sangha, you can bring the Sangha to mind. So we really do benefit from the Sangha. our Dharma practice really exists on the shoulders of the Sangha, all the way up from the Buddha, all the way to everybody who is coming here now, everybody who you've heard the Dharma from in any way, and anybody who sits around you and supports you in your practice. So we could really dwell on that and allow the gratitude and respect, and even, dare I say, reverence, to arise in relation to the Sangha, really to open up to the influence of the Sangha, you know, our friends trying to support us and guide us in that positive direction. So there's a few ideas based on the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, but you might have some other thing that you like to do or reflect on that really puts you in touch with your inspiration and your faith. And if so, then I'm sure we could put that in this list, because the important thing is about this that we're deliberately bringing to mind something that is going to inspire us and move us in the direction that we want to go. And if we can consciously bring these things to mind, then what will naturally arise will be joy and the other things. So, yeah, so that's option number 2. So, yeah, we've had dukkha, and now we've got recollecting lovely things. Finally, so this is a little question. So we've got the threefold path. If we've had, what do we have? We have wisdom, and now we've got meditation. What's left? We've got ethics. Ethics is the last path that I'm going to look at. So this is another, and this appears in loads of the different spiral paths that you find in the Pali Canon actually. So it's probably the one that's talks about the most. So in this one, we start with skillful action. So I've done this little picture of incense because that's an image for our beautiful action spreading out into the world and affecting everybody in a lovely way. So so this is the first step on a number of spiral paths. And in this version of the spiral path, we start with skillful action. And then we have freedom from remorse, this lovely quality, avipattisana, freedom from remorse. And freedom from remorse leads to joy. So that's nice. In some ways, I feel like I don't need to say all that much about this because you've probably all experienced the way in which when we behave in a skillful way and we register that we have done that. But it's just lovely, isn't it? You know, we feel light, we feel sort of uplifted, we feel sometimes I feel a thrill actually even. And I was reflecting that sometimes I know this quality best from when I've not had it, if you see what I mean, the opposite. So recently, I realised that in a particular situation in my life, I was habitually taking the not freely given. And when I recognised this, I felt really horrible, actually, that I was doing this. But I couldn't immediately disentangle myself from that situation, so I had to continue in that way of being for a little while. It's not always possible just immediately. So, I was very aware that I was doing this. And it was really strong, the effect it has on my consciousness. I felt heavy and oppressed and sort of conflicted and divided in my being. It was really very unpleasant. And my meditation was just in tatters. I could not focus on anything because I was so aware of my unskillfulness. And I think that's the opposite of freedom from remorse. It's a heavy, sort of tight and chained up sort of feeling. And the opposite of that, and when I managed to disentangle myself from that situation, was a comparative lightness and like I'd been released from prison. Actually, that's a phrase that a lot of people use in relation to the Dharma. When they've heard the teachings of the Buddha, they say, I feel like I've been let out of jail. And it felt like that. So, in some ways, you could say, well, this version of the spiral is quite easy, just follow the precepts. I mean, we learned that in the intro course. What's the problem, Dharmamayi? Well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think practicing the precepts perfectly is altogether simple. It can be quite tricky. We're not enlightened, we're not practicing the precepts perfectly, none of us. So when we make errors in that way, you don't need to feel alone in that. Yeah, until we are enlightened, there is no end to the development of the positive states that we can develop through skillful action. I think it's important to recognise that ethics, although it's the first step of the path, is not a preliminary practice that we, oh, well, I'm not killing anything anymore. Now I'm a vegetarian and I don't tell any lies, so that's enough. Actually, that's not it. Like, it goes on and on, right up until the point of enlightenment becoming more and more subtle and potent. But having said that, we are all doing skillful actions all the time. Perhaps not all of the time, but some of the time. You will have performed many skillful actions today. Every time you hold a door open for somebody, or even refrain from slamming it in somebody's face. Every time you greet somebody with a smile, every time you say something pleasant to somebody rather than criticism, every time you push away, you take your attention away from a hateful thought and try and replace it with a kinder thought. These are very potent, karmic actions we are performing in our being, and they are all having this effect. They are all perfuming ourselves and the world in this beautiful way. I think on this path, the real trick is recognising that we are performing skillful actions. It's not that we don't, we can always be more skillful, obviously, but if we don't recognise we're skillful in the first place, we're not going to register freedom from remorse, and we're not going to experience joy and all of the other fruits. It's very un-British, isn't it, to think about how great we are. But in a way, that's what we've got to do. We've got to recognise that we are great. Like, we're trying our best, and we're doing lots of good stuff. And that is having a good effect. And when we do that, then we will be on the path. We will be on the path. We'll feel that buoyancy of heart, and we will be on the path. So, in this talk, then, we've touched on these 3 different paths, so just to refresh our memories. So, the first one is sort of more in the realm of wisdom. So, we've been looking into how our Vedana is fleeting, ephemeral, never going to satisfy us. So, it's dukkha, leading to faith. Secondly, that what we reflect on, what we put our attention on, can move us in the direction of the spiral, and the 3 jewels, the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, are very important because they really do represent all of the beauty, the beauty of the spiritual ideal in all of its glory. So that's the second thing, the second jumping off point. Thirdly, ethics. So we can perform and, importantly, notice our skillful behaviour. So, just before I finish, I want to make a few points just sort of about spirals in general, because they've all got something in common that I think it's important to pull out. So, the first thing I really want to stress is that from these spirals we can see that positive mental states are not random. They don't just magically manifest. We can cultivate them. There's a lot of conditions we don't have control over, but there's a lot that we do as well. We do have some influence over our minds, quite a lot of influence over our minds. So it's easy to forget, but if we do fall into the trap of thinking that our positive states are random, we won't take responsibility for cultivating ones that are positive. So that's the first thing to remember. Our positive mental states are conditioned, so we need to take responsibility for cultivating positive mental states. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we can't grasp after these mental states. There's like a whole load of paradoxes here. We've got to cultivate them, but we can't grasp after them. So each mental state will arise naturally on the flowering of the previous positive mental state. It's like a cake. Now, I'm no baker, but I believe this to be true, that if you want to bake a cake, you must put all the correct ingredients into the thing before you put it in the oven. The thing. If you don't, you may sit in front of your oven for a very long time and no cake will appear in the oven. And it's just the same with our minds. If we don't put the right conditions into our oven, we're never going to have peace and joy and all the other lovely things that we want to produce. We need to have all of the bits going on. So yeah. So that might look like putting into practice some of the methods that I've talked about in this talk. So, if we want, samadhi and insight into reality. We can start with being ethical. We can start with, reflecting on something we want to move towards, like the Buddha, small beginnings. And we can trust, because conditionality is in operation, we can trust that if we do this, and we just focus on where we are, what's the next step, this other stuff will just emerge. We don't have to worry about it. Just concentrate on where we are. Focus on the conditions and not the outcome. That's the second thing. Third thing, although it's a natural process, it doesn't mean it's automatic, unfortunately. So, at least, especially in the first instance, this might require some effort, sometimes quite a lot of effort, to get ourselves onto the spiral in the first place. It's hard. We've been going around this wheel, goodness knows how long, and doing something different goes against every instinct of our being sometimes. So it's going to take some effort. That moment when we feel grotty and we decide not to just distract ourselves, it's hard, or a moment of dragging our mind away from something that we'd rather be thinking about, which is a bit frivolous and inconsequential, when we could be reflecting on something of more importance, like the Dharma or the Buddha, or making a difficult ethical decision which might bring us discomfort or embarrassment, or that sort of thing. So that's quite a lot of effort. So that's the thing to remember, that it might require effort. We can't just kind of sit back on our laurels to get onto the spiral. But then do remember, though, that once we have made that effort and we're on the spiral, well, the next step is joy. Great. And I think it's really important to remember that joy is quite far near the beginning of all of the paths. So it's like the next step. It's what we're going to all experience at some stage very soon if we make these efforts to engage with the spiral path. And I think it's important to remember that should be the nature of the Dharma. It's not going to be fun all the time, but in its essence, the Dharma is deeply joyful. The Dharma life is joyful. And but joy isn't even the end. It just gets better. It gets better and better all the way to complete and total freedom. And then to realising we're free, and then you might say, that's only the beginning.